The moment Ruby's hands moved in sign language, Signora Sabatini's eyes filled with tears, but her son's filled with something far more dangerous: suspicion. Because that dialect died in a blood-soaked Naples neighborhood 20 years ago, the same night Ruby's father vanished. And now the Mafia boss was leaning forward with one question that could unravel everything. Where did you really learn that? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's begin. The chandeliers glowed like captured stars, their reflections dancing across the marble floors of La Velura as soft jazz curled through the air. Crystal stemware caught the light in precise angles, transforming the dining room into something between dream and artifice. Beautiful, expensive, and utterly controlled. Ruby Oliver moved through it all like a whisper. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over 3 years of working Manhattan's most prestigious restaurant. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet one, polite, efficient, never late, never complaining. Some whispered about the mystery in her soft accent, the way certain words carried the ghost of somewhere far away. But Ruby never offered explanations, and eventually, people stopped asking. Invisibility, she'd learned, was its own kind of armor. Tonight felt different. Ruby sensed it in the air before she understood why, the way Marcus, the floor manager, checked his watch obsessively, the sudden tension in the sommelier's shoulders, the hushed conversation between 2 senior waiters near the kitchen doors. "Table 9, she heard someone murmur. "They're coming tonight." Ruby had worked here long enough to know that Table 9 meant power. Politicians who shaped legislation over dessert wine. CEOs whose signatures moved markets. Men whose wealth came wrapped in questions no one dared ask aloud. But she'd never seen Marcus look quite this nervous. When the doors opened at precisely 8 o'clock, the entire restaurant seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Silvestro Sabatini entered like winter itself, cold, commanding, impossible to ignore. He wore his tailored black suit with the ease of someone who'd never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. Dark hair swept back from a face carved in sharp angles, and eyes that missed nothing moved across the dining room with predatory assessment. Beside him, elegant and silver-haired, walked Signora Lucia Sabatini. She moved with the grace of old money and older grief, her pale blue dress catching the light as she took her son's arm. The restaurant didn't quite stop. La Velura's clientele was too sophisticated for that. But everything slowed. Conversations dropped to whispers. Forks paused mid-air. Even the jazz seemed to soften, as if the pianist understood that certain presences demanded deference. Ruby watched from her station near the bar, her hands steady even as her pulse quickened. She'd heard the name Sabatini before, always spoken with a mixture of respect and fear. Italian. Connected. Dangerous in ways that didn't require explanation. "Ruby." Marcus appeared at her elbow, his voice tight. "Table 9. You're taking it." Her stomach dropped. "Why me?" "Because you don't gossip, you don't gawk, and you won't do anything stupid." He straightened his tie nervously. "Just be perfect, please." Ruby nodded, smoothing her apron as she approached the corner table where Silvestro was seating his mother with careful attention. She focused on the practiced rhythm of service, water glasses balanced precisely, posture perfect, voice calm. "Good evening. Welcome to La Velura." "Thank you." Silvestro's voice was low, controlled, but his attention had already shifted to his mother, helping her settle into her chair with surprising tenderness. Ruby set down the water glasses and was turning to retrieve menus when she noticed Lucia's hands moving, elegant fingers shaping patterns in the air, trying to catch someone's attention. The older woman's expression carried quiet frustration as another waiter passed without understanding. Ruby froze. She recognized those movements immediately, intimately, They weren't random gestures, but precise communication, a rare Neapolitan dialect of Italian Sign Language that most people didn't even know existed. Her grandmother's language, the language of her buried past. She shouldn't respond. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, stay hidden, stay safe. But watching Lucia's growing frustration, seeing the isolation in her graceful movements, Ruby's hands moved before her mind could stop them. "Good evening, Signora," she signed, her fingers flowing with the fluency of muscle memory and love. "It's an honor to serve you tonight." Lucia's face transformed, shock melting into pure joy. Her hands flew up in response, animated and delighted. "You speak it! You speak our dialect! No one ever understands. Where did you learn?" The restaurant had gone absolutely silent. Ruby felt it like a physical thing. Every conversation dead, every eye turning toward Table 9, every person in La Valura frozen in disbelief. The quiet waitress they'd worked beside for years was speaking a language none of them recognized, communicating with the Mafia boss's mother as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "My grandmother taught me," Ruby signed back, her heart hammering, "when I was young." Silvestro's gaze snapped to her with laser focus. He leaned back in his chair, studying Ruby with an intensity that made her feel exposed, vulnerable, seen in ways she'd carefully avoided for years. His eyes were dark, calculating, missing nothing. Not her trembling hands, not the way she'd instinctively responded, not the dialect she'd just revealed she knew. Naples. His voice cut through the silence smoothly, dangerously curious. Ruby lowered her hands, retreating behind professional composure. "Your mother reminds me of home," she said quietly, the admission escaping before she could cage it. Lucia reached across the table, catching Ruby's wrist with surprising warmth. Her signs came slower now, weighted with emotion. "Thank you. You've given me a gift tonight, to be heard, to be understood. It's been so long." Something shifted in Silvestro's expression, the cold calculation warming to something Ruby couldn't quite name. Curiosity, yes, but also something protective, almost gentle, as he watched his mother's joy. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ruby. Ruby Oliver." He studied her for a long moment, and Ruby felt the weight of his attention like a brand. "My mother seems quite taken with you, Miss Oliver. I suspect this won't be our last conversation." It wasn't a question. It was inevitability wrapped in courtesy. Ruby excused herself with practiced grace, her legs somehow carrying her back across the dining room, even as her world tilted dangerously. She could feel every eye following her, could sense the whispers starting, could hear her carefully constructed anonymity shattering like crystal against marble. She'd spoken when she should have stayed silent. She'd revealed herself when she should have remained invisible. And now, Silvestro Sabatini was watching her with the patient interest of a man who'd just discovered something unexpected, something that didn't make sense, something that demanded investigation. As Ruby reached the safety of the kitchen doors, she glanced back one final time. Silvestro was still watching, his dark eyes holding hers across the glittering distance, and Ruby knew with the terrible certainty of instinct that her 3 years of hiding had just come to an end. Ruby stood in the narrow hallway outside her apartment, staring at the cream-colored envelope someone had slipped beneath her door. Her name was written across the front in elegant script, not Ruby Oliver, but simply Ruby. No return address, no postmark. Hand-delivered. Her pulse quickened as she tore it open. Inside, 5 crisp $100 bills and a note card bearing a single line. "Thank you for speaking with my mother." SS Ruby's hands trembled. The tip was far too generous for a single evening service, but that wasn't what unsettled her. It was the implication beneath those 8 words, the weight of attention from a man who didn't offer gratitude lightly. She'd spent 3 years building walls around herself, and in one evening, Silvestro Sabatini had found the cracks. 3 nights passed before he returned. Ruby was refilling water glasses in the main dining room when Marcus caught her elbow, his expression tight with warning. "Table 9. He's back." "His mother?" Ruby asked, though she already knew the answer from the tension in his voice. "Just him, and he asked for you specifically." Her stomach dropped. "What do I—" "You serve him," Marcus said quietly. "What else can you do?" Ruby smoothed her apron and crossed the dining room, feeling the weight of every step. Silvestro sat alone at the corner table, illuminated by candlelight that softened his sharp features without diminishing their intensity. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, his attention fixed on the wine list until she approached. When he looked up, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, yes, but also calculation. "Good evening, Mr. Sabatini," Ruby said, falling into the safety of professional courtesy. "Will your mother be joining you tonight?" "No." His voice was quiet, measured. "Tonight I'd like you to join me instead." Ruby blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Sit." It wasn't quite a request. "Please." She glanced toward the kitchen, toward her manager, searching for an excuse, but the restaurant was only half full, and Silvestro's gaze held hers with the patience of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Slowly, Ruby slid into the chair across from him. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked, signaling the sommelier without waiting for her answer. "Wine? Water?" "I'm working," Ruby managed. "Consider it a break." He leaned back, studying her with the same intensity she remembered from Thursday night. "I wanted to thank you properly. My mother hasn't stopped talking about you." "That's kind, but the note was more than enough. How long have you lived in New York?" The question cut through her deflection smoothly, changing direction without warning. Ruby hesitated. "Almost 3 years. "And before that?" "Different places." She kept her tone light, casual. "I moved around a lot growing up." "Italy?" Her throat tightened. "For a while." "Which part?" The sommelier arrived with 2 glasses of red wine, giving Ruby a moment to breathe. When he left, she met Silvestro's gaze directly, forcing herself not to look away. "Why does it matter?" "Because my mother speaks a dialect most linguists don't even recognize anymore," Silvestro said quietly. "It's specific to a handful of villages near Caserta, the kind of thing you only learn if you're from there, or if someone who loved you was." Ruby's fingers tightened around her wine glass. "My grandmother taught me." "What was her name?" "Does it matter?" "Everything matters when something doesn't make sense." He took a slow sip of wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "You see, I had someone look into your background, Ruby Oliver. Clean record, solid references, employment history stretching back 3 years. Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. "Then what's the problem?" "The problem," Silvestro said softly, "is that before age 16, you don't exist." The words hung between them like a blade. Ruby forced herself to breathe, to maintain the mask she'd perfected over years of hiding. Lots of people have complicated childhoods. Not everyone leaves a paper trail. True. He tilted his head slightly, still watching her. But most people don't speak a dying dialect of Italian Sign Language they claim to have learned from their grandmother while having no immigration records, no school transcripts, no medical history before appearing in New York with a social security number that's suspiciously recent. Ruby set down her glass carefully, afraid he'd see her hands shaking. "If you think I'm dangerous, why invite me to sit with you?" "I didn't say you were dangerous." Something shifted in his expression, not quite warmth, but something close to curiosity. "I said you don't make sense. And in my experience, people who don't make sense are either hiding something worth protecting or something worth discovering. Maybe I just value my privacy. Maybe. Silvestro leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. Or maybe you're running from something. Someone. Ruby stood abruptly, her chair scraping against marble. I should get back to work. One more question. His tone remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. Your accent. When you speak Italian, there's something underneath it. Something you're trying to hide. Where are you really from, Ruby? She met his gaze, and for one reckless moment, she almost told him. Almost let the truth spill out. Naples. My father testified against corrupt officials connected to families like yours. They made him disappear. I changed my name to survive. Instead, she said, Thank you for the wine, Mr. Sabatini, but I'm just a waitress who was kind to your mother. Nothing more. She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her cold. My mother thinks you're hiding from something painful. She says she sees it in the way you sign, like someone speaking a language they're afraid to remember. He paused. She also says you remind her of someone she lost a long time ago. Ruby's breath caught. She didn't turn around. Who? She won't tell me. Not yet. Silvestro's chair scraped back as he stood. But I intend to find out. For her sake, if not mine. When Ruby finally looked back, he was placing several bills on the table, far too much for an untouched glass of wine. I'll see you next Thursday, he said quietly. My mother insists. Then he was gone, leaving Ruby standing alone in the candlelit dining room with the certainty that her carefully constructed life was beginning to unravel. That night, Ruby couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She took a different route home, checking over her shoulder every few blocks. When she finally reached her building, she noticed the black car parked across the street, windows tinted, engine running. It hadn't been there when she left for work. Ruby hurried inside and climbed the stairs to her apartment, her heart pounding. She locked the door behind her, checked the windows, pulled the curtains closed. But even in the darkness of her small studio, she could feel it. The weight of Silvestro Sabatini's attention, methodical and patient, like a net slowly tightening around her. He was watching, waiting. And sooner or later, he would find the truth she'd buried 3 years ago. The only question was whether that truth would save her, or destroy them both. Ruby hadn't thought about her father's face in months. She'd trained herself not to. Trained herself to lock away the memory of his gentle hands, the way he'd taught her languages like love letters to the world, the sound of his voice reading poetry in dialects most people had forgotten existed. But tonight, standing at her kitchen window watching the black SUV idle across the street for the 3rd consecutive evening, the memories came flooding back. Naples, 12 years ago. She'd been Rubiana then, Rubiana Moretti, daughter of Professor Antonio Moretti, a linguist whose expertise in dying languages had made him both celebrated and dangerous. He'd been consulting on a government case, translating intercepted communications when he'd stumbled onto something he shouldn't have seen. Conversations that implicated not just criminals, but politicians, judges, men whose power ran deeper than any courtroom could touch. When her father testified, he'd signed his own death warrant. Ruby remembered the night they came for him, the sound of breaking glass, her mother's muffled scream, the way her father had pressed his university ring into her palm and whispered in Neapolitan sign language, "Run, forget, survive." 3 days later, Antonio Moretti vanished. No body, no answers, just whispers in the dark about what happened to men who spoke too loudly about powerful families. Her mother had fled with her to America within the week, armed with falsified documents and the terrible weight of silence. They'd become the Olivers, generic, invisible, safe. Her mother had died 2 years later from a heart that had simply given up on fear. And Ruby had kept running, kept hiding, kept silent, until Thursday night, when she'd foolishly spoken the language of her ghosts. The invitation arrived on Tuesday, not slipped under her door this time, but hand-delivered by a driver in a tailored suit who waited for her response as if refusal wasn't an option. My mother would be honored by your company for afternoon tea. Saturday, 2 p.m. A car will collect you. No signature. None needed. Ruby stared at the card, feeling fate's grip tighten around her throat. The Sabatini mansion sat behind iron gates in a part of Manhattan where old money whispered rather than shouted. The car that collected Ruby moved through tree-lined streets with practiced silence, and when they finally stopped, she found herself staring at a limestone facade that looked transplanted from a Tuscan hillside. Silvestro met her at the door, his expression unreadable. She's been looking forward to this all week. I didn't think I had a choice, Ruby said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, acknowledgement perhaps, or respect for her honesty. You always have a choice, but some invitations are harder to decline than others. He led her through hallways lined with art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, past rooms that hummed with the weight of legacy and power. Ruby felt the mansion closing around her like a fist, each step taking her deeper into a world she'd spent years trying to escape. Lucia waited in a sunlit conservatory, surrounded by white orchids and antique furniture that looked museum precious. Her face lit up when Ruby entered, hands already moving in greeting. You came? I'm so glad. Ruby signed back, managing a smile despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. Thank you for inviting me, Signora. They sat. Tea was poured. Lucia talked about Naples, about the dialect, about memories that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. And then, with the casualness of someone mentioning the weather, she produced a leather-bound photo album. I wanted to show you something, Lucia signed, her eyes warm with nostalgia. Old friends, old memories. She opened the album to a page marked with a silk ribbon. Ruby's world stopped. The photograph was slightly faded, taken perhaps 20 years ago in what looked like a university courtyard. A younger Lucia Sabatini stood beside a man Ruby would recognize anywhere, even in her nightmares, her father, Antonio Moretti, both of them smiling at the camera like old friends sharing a secret. This man, Lucia signed slowly, watching Ruby's face, saved my life once. A long time ago, when I was caught between dangerous people and couldn't speak for myself. He translated for me, protected me, made sure I was heard. Ruby's hands trembled. She couldn't look away from her father's face. His name was Antonio, Lucia continued, her expression tender with memory. The kindest man I ever knew. And when I look at you, when you sign, when you move your hands with that same gentle precision. She paused, reaching across to touch Ruby's wrist. You remind me of him. So much it breaks my heart. Across the room, Silvestro had gone very still, his dark eyes moving between his mother and Ruby with sudden, sharp understanding. Ruby's carefully constructed walls crumbled. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. His name was Antonio Moretti, and he was my father. The words hung in the air like confession and accusation both. Lucia's hand flew to her mouth, tears already forming. Silvestro leaned forward, every muscle tensed, as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed suddenly began falling into terrible place. Your father testified against... he started. Against men connected to your family, Ruby finished, her voice steadier now that the truth was finally bleeding out. And then he disappeared. And my mother and I ran, and I've been running ever since. The conservatory filled with heavy silence, broken only by the soft sound of Lucia's weeping. Ruby stood, her decision made. Thank you for the tea, Signora. But I think it's time I left. No. Silvestro's voice cut through the air like a blade. He was standing now too, his expression fierce. You're not leaving. Not until we figure out what really happened. Not until... Until what? Ruby's eyes flashed. Until you decide whether I'm a threat? Until you determine if the daughter of the man your family destroyed is worth keeping alive? My family didn't destroy your father, Silvestro said, each word carefully controlled. But I'm going to find out who did. It wasn't comfort. It wasn't even quite a promise. But as Ruby looked into his eyes, she saw something that terrified her more than danger ever could. She saw determination born of guilt, curiosity sharpened into purpose, and beneath it all, the beginning of something that looked dangerously like protection. Fate wasn't just pulling her back into danger, it was rewriting the story she thought she knew. Ruby stood frozen in Lucia's parlor, the weight of those words pressing against her chest like a physical force. What truth? Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but before Lucia could answer, Silvestro stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Not here. Not now. He glanced at his mother with something that looked like protective concern. This conversation requires privacy, and time my mother doesn't have today. Her medication makes her tired. Lucia started to protest, but exhaustion lined her features, betraying her. She squeezed Ruby's hand one final time. Come back, please. There's so much you need to know. Ruby nodded, unable to trust her voice. As Silvestro guided her from the parlor, she felt the photograph burning in her memory. Her father's smile, Lucia's hand on his arm, a friendship that somehow connected their broken worlds. Outside, the autumn air bit sharp and clean, pulling Ruby back to the present. She expected Silvestro to summon the driver, to send her home with more questions than answers. Instead, he opened the door to a sleek black car himself. Get in, he said quietly. Where are we going? Somewhere you need to see. His dark eyes held hers. If you want to understand who I really am. Every instinct screamed at Ruby to refuse, to run, to protect what remained of her carefully constructed safety. But curiosity, and something more dangerous, something that felt like hope, made her slide into the passenger seat. Silvestro drove in silence, navigating through Manhattan's polished facade and into Brooklyn's grittier neighborhoods. The buildings grew shorter, more weathered. Graffiti bloomed across brick walls like urban flowers. This was the city most tourists never saw, the one where wealth's promises faded into struggle's reality. Finally, he pulled up outside a renovated warehouse, its facade painted cheerful yellow with a simple sign, Sanctuary Foundation. What is this? Ruby asked. The part of my life no one talks about. Silvestro killed the engine. The part that would disappoint my father's associates and confuse my enemies. He led her inside, where the industrial space had been transformed into something remarkable. Open areas filled with books, art supplies, computers. The sound of children's laughter echoed from deeper within Bao. A young woman at the front desk looked up, her face brightening when she saw Silvestro. Mr. S., we weren't expecting you today. Just showing someone around, Elena. His voice softened in a way Ruby hadn't heard before. How's your brother doing? Starting community college next month, thanks to the scholarship. Elena's eyes glistened. We couldn't have done it without you. As they walked through the facility, Ruby watched Silvestro's transformation. Children ran up to greet him, some shy, others exuberant, and he knew each of their names, asked about homework and soccer games and sick grandmothers. Staff members smiled with genuine affection, not the careful deference she'd seen at the restaurant. This was a different man entirely. We serve about 200 families, Silvestro explained. showing her a library where teenagers studied quietly. Kids who've lost parents to gang violence, addiction, poverty. Most people in my world create these problems. I'm trying to solve them. Why? The question escaped before Ruby could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment, watching a little girl carefully color within the lines of a butterfly drawing. Because I've seen what my family's legacy leaves behind. The bodies, the broken homes, the children who grow up learning that violence is the only language that matters. He turned to face Ruby. My father built an empire on fear. I want to build something that lasts without requiring blood. Ruby's throat tightened. Does your mother know? She's the only one who does. This foundation was her idea, actually. A shadow crossed his features. After my father died, she made me promise to find another way, but the family business doesn't allow for easy exits. So you live both lives. I survive both lives. His jaw tightened. The question is, for how long? They stood in silence, surrounded by the hopeful chaos of children being given chances they shouldn't have needed. Ruby felt something shift inside her, the careful distance she'd maintained crumbling beneath the weight of understanding. Silvestro Sabatini was as trapped as she was, bound by legacies they'd never chosen. Your father, Silvestro said quietly. What he did, testifying against the corruption. It was brave. Reckless but brave. Ruby's eyes burned. It got him killed. Probably. He didn't soften the truth. But it also changed things. The politicians he exposed lost power. The construction contracts went to legitimate firms. People suffered less because of his courage. That doesn't bring him back. No. Silvestro's gaze held hers. But it means his sacrifice mattered. That's something. Ruby turned away, blinking back tears. Through the windows, she could see Brooklyn's skyline silhouetted against the darkening sky, a city of contradictions, where beauty and brutality lived side by side, just like the man standing beside her. The drive back to Manhattan was quieter, weighted with things neither of them could say. When Silvestro finally pulled up outside her building, a black SUV was already waiting. One of his, Ruby realized. Protection she hadn't asked for but apparently needed. My men will watch your building tonight, Silvestro said. Just a precaution. Against what? His jaw tightened. People who ask too many questions about why I'm spending time with a waitress. Before Ruby could respond, another car pulled up, a silver Mercedes that screamed expensive taste. A man emerged, early 40s, with slicked-back hair and a suit that cost more than Ruby's monthly rent. His eyes were cold as they swept over Ruby before settling on Silvestro with barely concealed irritation. Marco, Silvestro said, his tone cooling several degrees. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. Marco Varella's smile didn't reach his eyes. He glanced at Ruby again, assessing, dismissive. We need to talk. About the shipment delay and other matters. Tomorrow. Now. Marco's voice hardened. Unless your new distraction is more important than business. The word hung in the air like an insult. Ruby felt her cheeks flush, but Silvestro's expression turned to stone. Watch yourself, Marco. Someone has to. Marco stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough that Ruby couldn't hear. Attachments make you weak, Silvestro. Your father understood that. I hope you remember it before you compromise everything he built. For a moment, Ruby thought Silvestro might strike him. Violence simmered beneath his controlled exterior, dangerous and barely leashed. But then he simply turned to Ruby, his voice gentle despite the fury in his eyes. Go inside. Lock your door. Ruby wanted to argue, to prove she wasn't some fragile thing that needed protecting. But the tension between the two men was palpable, and she recognized the wisdom in retreat. Thank you, she said quietly. For today. Silvestro's expression softened fractionally. We'll talk soon. As Ruby climbed the stairs to her apartment, she heard Marco's voice drift up from the street, sharp with warning. She's a liability. People are already talking. If you're not careful, she'll get you killed. Or worse, make you soft. Silvestro's response was too low to hear, but the menace in it made Ruby shiver. Inside her apartment, Ruby locked the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. The day had unraveled every certainty she'd built. Her father had known Lucia. Silvestro ran a foundation for broken children, and now his own men were questioning his judgment because of her. She shouldn't go back. Shouldn't answer if Lucia called again. Should pack her bags tonight and disappear the way her mother had taught her. Her phone buzzed. Ruby pulled it out, expecting a message from her manager about tomorrow's shift. Instead, an unknown number filled her screen. You shouldn't have spoken her language. Her blood ran cold. Another message followed immediately. Some secrets should stay buried, Rubiana Moretti. Ruby dropped the phone like it had burned her. They knew. Someone knew her real name, knew about her father, knew she'd been to the Sabatini mansion. She grabbed the phone with shaking hands, but before she could decide what to do, one final message arrived. The devil's heir thinks he can protect you. He's wrong. Ruby sank onto her bed, terror warring with something else, anger. She'd spent 3 years running, hiding, erasing herself. And now someone was threatening her again, trying to make her disappear back into the shadows. Outside her window, she could see Silvestro's SUV, a silent promise of protection, but Marco's words echoed in her mind. Attachments make you weak. Ruby stared at the threatening messages, then at the black vehicle below. Silvestro Sabatini was caught between two worlds, the violent legacy he'd inherited and the redemption he was trying to build. By getting close to him, she was forcing him to choose. And in his world, the wrong choice didn't just hurt you, it destroyed everyone you cared about. Ruby's phone buzzed one more time. This message was from Silvestro. Sleep well. You're safe tonight. But as Ruby turned off the lights and watched shadows dance across her ceiling, she knew the truth. In a world where kindness could be weaponized and love could get you killed, safety was just another beautiful lie. And she was falling for it anyway. Ruby arrived at La Velura Friday evening with shadows beneath her eyes and her father's pocket knife hidden in her apron pocket. The threatening messages had stopped after that first night, but their silence felt more ominous than their words. Marcus noticed immediately. You look terrible. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Ruby tied her apron with hands that had finally stopped shaking. 3 days had passed since the messages, since Marco's warning, since everything had spiraled beyond her control. Table 9 is reserved tonight, Marcus said carefully. Private party. The Sabatinis and close associates only. Ruby's stomach dropped. I can work other sections. They requested you specifically. Marcus lowered his voice. Listen, I don't know what's going on between you and them, but whatever it is, be careful. Men like Sabatini don't do relationships. They do transactions. But Marcus didn't understand. None of them did. This wasn't about romance or transactions. It was about survival, about secrets that refused to stay buried, about a connection that defied logic and probably sanity. Ruby nodded anyway, smoothing her uniform. I'll be careful. The restaurant transformed as evening settled, chandeliers casting their golden glow, soft music weaving through conversations, the scent of expensive wine and Italian herbs perfuming the air. But tonight, the usual elegance felt fragile, like glass stretched too thin. When the Sabatini party arrived, Ruby felt the shift immediately. Silvestro entered first with Lucia on his arm, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her smile warm as she spotted Ruby. Behind them came 6 men in expensive suits, the kind who moved with lethal grace disguised as civility. Marco Varela was among them. His cold eyes found Ruby across the dining room, and something in his expression made her blood run ice cold. Not anger, exactly, but calculation. The look of a man who'd already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to execute it. Ruby approached the table, her professional smile firmly in place. "Good evening. Welcome to La Velura." Lucia's hands moved immediately, her signs filled with warmth. "How lovely to see you again, my dear." "And you, Signora?" Ruby's hands responded automatically, muscle memory overriding fear. Silvestro's gaze lingered on her face, and she knew he saw everything. The exhaustion, the fear she couldn't quite hide. But he said nothing, simply gestured for her to begin service. The evening progressed with practiced elegance. Ruby served appetizers, refilled water glasses, maintained the illusion that this was just another dinner party for Manhattan's elite. But tension hummed beneath the surface. The men spoke in low voices about shipments and territories, using language that sounded legitimate but carried darker meanings. And Marco watched her, always watching. When dessert concluded, Silvestro called for wine, a private reserve, something special. Ruby retreated to the sommelier's station where Giorgio was already preparing the bottle, his movements precise and reverent. "Barbaresco, 1997, he murmured. "One of our finest. Mr. Sabatini has excellent taste." Ruby carried the bottle to the table on a silver tray, hyper-aware of Marco's gaze tracking her every movement. She poured carefully, Silvestro first, as protocol demanded, then Lucia, then each of the associates in turn. Marco rose smoothly. "Allow me to serve the rest. You've done enough." Something in his tone raised every alarm in Ruby's body, but refusing would cause a scene. She handed him the bottle and stepped back, watching as he moved around the table with practiced ease. That's when she saw it. His hand moved in a subtle gesture as he poured. 3 fingers tapped against the glass stem in a pattern she recognized. Lucia had shown her that sign weeks ago during one of their conversations. It wasn't part of the formal sign language, but something older, a warning her family had used in Naples generations ago. Danger, poison, death. Ruby's heart stopped. Marco was signaling someone, or perhaps himself, a habit from years of using such signs. But he'd done it over Silvestro's glass, and now he was setting the bottle down, stepping back, waiting. Time fractured into slow motion. Silvestro reached for his wine, still deep in conversation with the man beside him. The crystal glass caught the candlelight, ruby liquid gleaming like blood. Marco's expression remained perfectly neutral, but his eyes held a terrible patience. Ruby didn't think, didn't calculate the consequences, or consider what it would cost her. She lunged forward, her hand striking the table with enough force to rattle plates. Silvestro's wine glass toppled, expensive Barbaresco flooding across white linen like a spreading wound. The entire restaurant fell silent. "I'm so sorry!" Ruby's voice came out too high, too panicked. "I tripped! I'm so clumsy!" But Silvestro wasn't looking at the spilled wine. He was looking at her face, at the terror she couldn't mask, and understanding dawned in his dark eyes like a terrible sunrise. His gaze snapped to Marco, who had gone utterly still. "Marco," Silvestro's voice was deadly quiet. "Why don't you drink from my glass, since Ruby was kind enough to pour fresh for everyone?" Marco's smile never wavered. "I'm not thirsty." "I insist." Silvestro stood slowly, and every man at the table tensed. "Drink." The restaurant held its breath. Diners at other tables had stopped eating, sensing violence about to crack through civility's thin veneer. Marco's hand moved toward his jacket, where Ruby knew men like him kept their weapons, but Silvestro was faster. His hand clamped down on Marco's wrist with brutal precision. "You made a mistake," Silvestro said softly, so only their table could hear. You signaled your intention. Did you forget my mother taught me the old signs, too? Ruby's breath caught. He'd seen it. He'd understood. Marco's composure finally cracked. He jerked backward, but two of the other men, apparently more loyal to Silvestro than Ruby had realized, blocked his escape. The sommelier station erupted in shouting as Giorgio realized something was catastrophically wrong. "Everyone out!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. "Restaurants closed for the evening!" Panicked diners scrambled for the exits while staff members rushed to usher them out. Ruby stood frozen as Silvestro's men surrounded Marco, their movements efficient and terrifying in their calm precision. Lucia's hand found Ruby's, squeezing gently. When Ruby looked down, the older woman was signing with her free hand. "Thank you for saving my son." "Get him out of here," Silvestro ordered, his voice like granite. "I'll deal with him later." As Marco was dragged toward the kitchen exit, he twisted back, his eyes finding Ruby with pure hatred. "You stupid girl! You have no idea what you've done. No idea whose plans you've ruined." Then he was gone, leaving behind only the sound of Ruby's racing heartbeat and the wreckage of an evening that had nearly ended in murder. Silvestro turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that looked like fear beneath his controlled exterior. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. Ruby's hands moved before her voice could catch up, signing the answer. "Your mother taught me the old warnings. I saw him signal danger over your glass." Lucia made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh, pulling Ruby into a fierce embrace. Over the older woman's shoulder, Ruby met Silvestro's gaze. They both knew what had just happened. Ruby wasn't just a waitress anymore. Not to his family, not to his enemies, not to anyone in his dangerous world. She'd just saved the life of a Mafia heir in front of witnesses who would spread the story like wildfire. And in doing so, she'd painted a target on her own back that no amount of running could ever erase. The Sabatini villa looked different in daylight, less imposing, almost vulnerable. Ruby stood at the iron gates Sunday morning, clutching the invitation Lucia had pressed into her hands as Silvestro's men had escorted her home Friday night. "Come alone. There are things you must know." The guard recognized her immediately and waved her through without questions. Apparently, saving Silvestro's life had earned her privileges that terrified her more than they comforted. Lucia met her at the door herself. No staff, no pretense. The elegant matriarch looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a cream cardigan despite the warmth of the sun streaming through tall windows. "Thank you for coming." Lucia's hands moved with her words, as if she couldn't quite trust her voice alone. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Ruby admitted. "But you're brave, like your father." Lucia's eyes glistened. "Come, we have much to discuss, and I'm afraid time is something I don't have in abundance anymore." She led Ruby not to the formal parlor, but to a smaller room lined with bookshelves, a personal study that smelled of old paper and lavender. Afternoon light painted the oriental rug in shades of gold. On an antique desk sat a wooden box, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Lucia settled into a chair and gestured for Ruby to sit across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the older woman's hands began to move, her signs deliberate and heavy with memory. "Your father's name was Alessandro Moretti. He was a linguist, a scholar. But more than that, he was a man who believed words could change the world." Lucia's smile was bittersweet. "We met in Naples nearly 30 years ago. I was young, newly married to Antonio Sabatini, and terrified of the life I'd stumbled into." Ruby's throat tightened. "How did you meet him?" "At a university lecture. Antonio had business nearby, something I wasn't supposed to question. I wandered into Alessandro's presentation on dying dialects of southern Italy." Lucia's hands paused, then continued. He was passionate, brilliant. When he spoke about preserving language, he made it sound like saving souls. We became friends, innocent at first, just conversations about words and culture. But then everything changed. Lucia opened the wooden box with trembling fingers. Inside lay dozens of letters, their edges yellowed with age, tied with faded ribbon. There was an assassination attempt. A politician who'd gotten too close to exposing corruption in the construction industry, contracts connected to families like ours. The gunman chose a crowded piazza, thought to hide in chaos. Ruby leaned forward, her heart pounding. Alessandro saw it happening. He pushed me out of the way just as the first shot fired. Lucia's voice cracked. The bullet meant for me, or perhaps for Antonio standing beside me. It missed because of your father's courage. He saved my life without knowing who I was, what my husband represented. Tears burned Ruby's eyes. He never told me. Because afterward, when he learned the truth, he did something more dangerous than saving my life. Lucia lifted the bundle of letters. He started investigating. Your father was meticulous, brilliant at connecting patterns others missed. He discovered that the corruption wasn't random, it was systematic. Construction contracts, political favors, money laundering, all of it tied together through specific families, including the Sabatinis, including us. Lucia's admission carried shame and sorrow in equal measure, but also others. Bigger fish, as Americans say. Alessandro compiled evidence, testimony, financial records. He planned to go to the authorities. Ruby's hands shook. That's what got him killed. Yes, and no. Lucia carefully untied the ribbon, selecting one letter in particular. Read this. It's the last one he sent me, 3 days before he disappeared. Ruby took the letter, her father's handwriting blurring through her tears. His words were urgent, cramped, written in Italian. Lucia, I've made copies of everything and hidden them in 3 locations. If something happens to me, know that this evidence will still surface. I've named names, including some within your husband's organization, who've been playing both sides. There's a man, I won't write his name here for your protection, who's been feeding information to the political opposition while pretending loyalty to the families. He's orchestrated murders, disappearances, framed innocent men. He's dangerous because he's patient, calculating. I wanted you to know. I never blamed you for what your husband was. You were kind to me when you didn't have to be. You listened when others dismissed me. That kindness matters even in dark times. Tell Rubiana I love her. Tell her words matter. Tell her silence is sometimes survival. Alessandro Ruby's vision swam. He knew. He knew they were coming for him. The evidence surfaced, as he promised. Politicians fell, contracts were investigated. Lucia's hands moved slowly. But Alessandro himself was never found. Antonio swore he had nothing to do with it. I believed him because my husband was many things, but he kept his word to me. He said he'd ordered his men to leave your father alone as repayment for the life Alessandro saved. Then who? Ruby whispered. That's what I've spent years trying to understand. Lucia pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with red wax. I found this among Antonio's papers after he died. He'd been keeping it safe, waiting for the right time. Perhaps he meant to tell me. Or perhaps he wanted the truth buried with him. I'll never know. Ruby stared at the seal, an ornate S pressed into wax. Inside is a name, Lucia continued. The person Antonio suspected orchestrated your father's disappearance. The man who played both sides, who betrayed everyone for power. She pressed the envelope into Ruby's hands. I need you to understand. This person may still be in Silvestro's organization, may still be planning, waiting. Before Ruby could break the seal, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Silvestro appeared in the doorway, his expression dark with something Ruby couldn't quite read. Anger, fear, resignation. "Mother, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago." Lucia stood, her frailty replaced by steel. "Telling the truth." "The truth gets people killed." Silvestro's gaze found Ruby. "You shouldn't be here. Either of you." "She saved your life," Lucia said quietly. "She deserves to know why someone wanted you dead, and why her father's ghost still haunts both our families." Silvestro's jaw tightened. He looked at the letters scattered across the desk, at the sealed envelope in Ruby's hands, and something in his expression crumbled. "Marco wasn't working alone," he said finally. "The poison, the betrayal, it goes deeper than one man's ambition." He crossed to the window, staring out at manicured gardens that hid decades of blood. "My father built this empire on loyalty enforced by fear. But someone's been systematically eliminating the old guard, replacing them with new allies. Someone's been planning a coup for years. And you think the same person—" Ruby couldn't finish. "I think whoever orchestrated your father's disappearance is still here, still watching, still waiting." Silvestro turned back, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole Ruby's breath. "And now that you've saved my life, now that everyone knows you matter to me, you're in their way too." Ruby looked down at the sealed envelope, her father's final mystery pressed between her shaking fingers. "Then I guess," she said quietly, "we'd better find out who we're fighting before they find us first." She broke the seal. The name inside the envelope was a ghost from both their pasts, Vincenzo Castellano. Ruby stared at the elegant handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. "Who is he?" Silvestro's expression turned to stone. "My father's oldest friend, his consigliere for 30 years. He took the envelope from Ruby's trembling hands. "And supposedly dead for the last 5. "Supposedly," Lucia's voice was sharp. "His car went into the East River. They never found a body." Silvestro's jaw clenched. "I was 23. My father told me Vincenzo had betrayed him, tried to steal shipment routes. I believed it, everyone did. We mourned him as a traitor and moved on." Ruby's mind raced. "But if he's alive, then he's been orchestrating everything from the shadows, Marco's betrayal, the internal conflicts, probably even—" Silvestro stopped, his eyes finding Ruby's. "Your father's disappearance." The weight of it settled over them like ash. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, birds sang obliviously, unaware that inside these walls, decades of carefully buried secrets were finally clawing their way to the surface. "You need to leave the city," Lucia signed to Ruby, her hands urgent. "Both of you, disappear until we understand what we're facing." "Running won't solve this," Silvestro said quietly. "If Vincenzo is alive, he has eyes everywhere. We'd be dead before we reached the airport." "Then what do we do?" Ruby's voice came out smaller than she intended. Silvestro looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "We find proof he's alive. We expose him before he can move against us." He turned to his mother. "I need access to Father's private files, everything he kept about Vincenzo's death. They're locked in the safe, second-floor study." Lucia hesitated. "Silvestro, if this is true, if Vincenzo has been planning for 5 years, he won't let you uncover him peacefully." "I know." His voice carried the weight of acceptance. "Which is why Ruby can't go home. Not tonight. Not until I know she's protected." Ruby started to protest, but Lucia's hand on her arm stopped her. "He's right, dear. You've been marked now. Every move you make will be watched." Hours later, Ruby found herself on a rooftop terrace overlooking the East River, the city lights painting the water in shades of amber and silver. Silvestro had brought her here after combing through his father's files, a private space above one of his legitimate businesses, far from the villa's watchful eyes. He stood at the railing, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. The dangerous air had given way to something rawer, a man carrying burdens he'd never chosen. "My father used to bring me here," he said quietly, not turning around. "When I was young, before I understood what his empire really meant, he'd point at the river and say, 'That's where everything gets washed clean, Silvestro. The city's conscience.'" A bitter laugh escaped him. I believed him. Thought he was teaching me about redemption. Ruby moved closer, the autumn wind catching her hair. "What was he really teaching you?" "Where to hide bodies." Silvestro's voice was hollow. "The currents here, they carry things out to sea. Nothing ever surfaces." He finally turned to face her. "Vincenzo's car went off that bridge. My father watched them pull it from the water, empty. I remember him crying that night, the only time I ever saw him break." "Maybe he was crying because he knew the truth," Ruby offered softly. "Maybe." Silvestro's dark eyes found hers. "Or maybe he cried because his best friend had become his greatest threat, and he had no choice but to let him disappear." He stepped closer. "In my world, Ruby, love is a weapon. Loyalty is currency. And caring about someone, truly caring, is the fastest way to get them killed." "Then why am I still alive?" The question hung between them like a confession. Silvestro reached out slowly, his fingers brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Because I'm selfish enough to want you alive more than I'm smart enough to push you away." His thumb traced her jawline. "Because when you signed to my mother that first night, something in me recognized something in you. Two people trapped by ghosts, trying to survive in a world that wants us silent." Ruby's breath caught. "Silvestro, I know this is insane. I know I'm putting you in danger just by standing here." His voice roughened with emotion. "But I haven't felt human in years. Haven't felt like anything mattered beyond survival and obligation. Then you knocked over a wine glass and saved my life, and suddenly—" "Suddenly everything changed," Ruby finished. He nodded, his forehead resting against hers. "I've been alone my entire life, surrounded by people. You've been alone because you had no choice. Maybe that's why this feels like coming home," Ruby whispered. When he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate passion of movies or books. It was tender, careful, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter. Ruby's hands found his shoulders, steadying herself against the dizziness of finally admitting what had been building between them since that first evening at La Velura. This was dangerous, reckless, everything she'd sworn to avoid. And yet, wrapped in Silvestro's arms above the city that had given them both shelter and scars, Ruby felt safer than she had in years. The moment broke when Silvestro's phone buzzed with brutal urgency. He pulled away, his expression darkening as he read the message. "What is it?" Ruby asked, though she already feared the answer. "We need to go, now." He grabbed his jacket, his entire demeanor shifting back to the controlled air she'd first met. "My men intercepted chatter. There's a contract out." Ruby's blood ran cold. "On you?" "On you." His voice was carefully controlled, but she saw the fury beneath it. 50,000. Open contract. Anyone can claim it. The world tilted. Who? That's the problem. The order came from inside my organization, but it's anonymous. Vincenzo, if he's alive... Silvestro pulled her toward the exit. Or someone else playing the long game. They'd barely reached the stairwell when Lucia's call came through. Silvestro answered on speaker, his mother's voice tight with fear. "They know about the letters, about everything Alessandro documented." Lucia's breathing was labored. "Silvestro, someone broke into the villa." They took the box, the files, everything. Are you safe? For now. But you need to understand. Lucia's voice cracked. The old ways do not forgive. Your father's generation, they saw sentiment as weakness and love as betrayal. If Vincenzo truly is alive, if he's been waiting all these years, he'll use Ruby against me, Silvestro finished grimly. He'll use her to destroy everything. You, the family, the legacy. Lucia's next words came in sign language, transmitted through desperate description. Sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to let it go. Silvestro's hand tightened on the phone. I'm not letting her go. Then you'd better be prepared to burn it all down to keep her safe, Lucia said quietly. Because that's what it will take. And you need to decide, tonight, if she's worth the ashes of everything your father built. The call ended, leaving them in the harsh fluorescent light of the stairwell. Ruby looked at Silvestro, saw the war raging behind his eyes, duty versus desire, legacy versus love. You should let me go, she said softly. Disappear. It's what I'm good at. No. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. We end this together, or we don't end it at all. Silvestro, I've lived my entire life in my father's shadow, doing what was expected, becoming what he demanded. He cupped her face in his hands. For once, just once, I want to choose something for myself, someone for myself. Even if it destroys you? Especially then. His smile was sad and beautiful and completely reckless. Because without you, I'm already destroyed. I just didn't know it yet. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Whether coming for them or someone else, Ruby couldn't tell. All she knew was that they'd crossed a line tonight that no amount of running could erase. They were in love. And in Silvestro's world, that made them both targets and weapons in a war that had been brewing for decades. The only question now was whether their love would save them, or become the blade that cut them both down. The ballroom at La Velura had been transformed into something out of a dream, or perhaps a beautiful lie. White orchids cascaded from every surface, their petals catching the light of 1,000 candles. The chandeliers blazed overhead like captured galaxies, casting prismatic shadows across marble floors polished to mirrors. Ruby adjusted her dress, midnight blue silk that Lucia had insisted she wear, and tried to steady her breathing. 2 weeks had passed since the contract on her life, 2 weeks of living in safe houses and borrowed apartments, always moving, never settling. Tonight was supposed to mark a new beginning. Silvestro's charity gala. His public declaration that the Sabatini family was transitioning into legitimate business, leaving behind the blood-soaked legacy his father had built. Politicians mingled with philanthropists, art collectors with former adversaries, all gathered to witness what the newspapers were calling the redemption of an empire. Ruby knew better. Redemption didn't come from one elegant evening. It came from years of hard choices and harder sacrifices. You look terrified, Marcus whispered, passing her with a tray of champagne. Try to smile. You're supposed to be celebrating. I'm trying, Ruby murmured, but her eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for threats in designer suits and practiced smiles. Silvestro stood near the stage, devastating in a black tuxedo, speaking with donors about the foundation's expansion plans. Lucia sat nearby, elegant in silver, her eyes bright with pride and worry in equal measure. To the casual observer, they were simply wealthy hosts welcoming Manhattan's elite. But Ruby saw the tension in Silvestro's shoulders, the security personnel disguised as waitstaff, the careful positioning of exits and sightlines. This gala was a performance, yes, but also a trap for anyone bold enough to strike. The evening progressed with orchestrated grace, Speeches were made, donations pledged, glasses raised in toasts to new beginnings. Ruby moved through the crowd like a ghost, serving champagne and canapes, trying to ignore the weight of eyes that followed her. Silvestro's date, they whispered. The waitress who'd saved his life. The mystery girl from nowhere. She was refilling water glasses near the balcony when she saw them. 3 men in server uniforms, standing close together near the kitchen entrance. Their hands moved in patterns she recognized immediately. Quick, deliberate signs in the old Neapolitan dialect. The language of silence that Lucia had taught her, that her grandmother had preserved, that these men were using to coordinate something terrible. Ruby's blood turned to ice as she caught fragments of their conversation. 10 minutes, when he moves to the stage. The woman first, then him. Castellano sends his regards. Her champagne tray clattered against the table, drawing startled looks. Ruby's heart hammered as she scanned the room for Silvestro, but he'd moved toward the stage for the final speech, exactly where they wanted him. She pushed through the crowd, her elegant dress suddenly a prison, high heels clicking desperately against marble. Excuse me. A hand caught her arm. Ruby spun to find Marco, somehow free, somehow here, his smile cold as winter. Going somewhere, little waitress? Let go of me. Ruby tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. You cost me everything. My position, my reputation, my future. His voice was soft, almost conversational. But Vincenzo promised me redemption if I delivered you both to him tonight. Ruby's knee came up hard, catching him off guard. He released her with a curse, and she ran, truly ran, across the ballroom toward the stage where Silvestro was taking the microphone. Silvestro! His name tore from her throat. He turned, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm as he saw her face, read the terror there. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket, where Ruby knew he kept a weapon despite this being a charity event. Then the lights went out. Screams erupted as darkness swallowed the ballroom. Ruby heard the distinctive sound of safeties clicking off, felt bodies pushing past her in panic. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in blood-red shadows. And there, moving through the chaos with terrible precision, were Marco's allies, guns drawn, advancing toward the stage where Silvestro stood exposed under the spotlight. Ruby didn't think, didn't calculate. Her body moved on instinct, memory, love, all the things that made survival less important than saving the person who'd become her entire world. She threw herself forward just as the first shot rang out. The bullet meant for Silvestro's chest caught her shoulder instead, spinning her backward. Pain exploded white-hot through her body, but she heard Silvestro's roar of rage, saw him vault from the stage with lethal grace. Glass shattered above them. One of the great chandeliers came crashing down, its crystal prisms exploding across the floor like dying stars. Guests screamed, scrambling for exits. Security personnel emerged from their positions, weapons drawn. Ruby's vision blurred, but she saw Silvestro reach the gunman, disarm him with brutal efficiency. Saw Marco trying to escape through the kitchen, only to be blocked by Lucia's personal guards, loyal to her, not to whatever conspiracy Vincenzo had orchestrated. More gunfire, more chaos. Ruby pressed her hand to her shoulder, feeling blood seep warm between her fingers. Someone was screaming. Maybe her, maybe the terrified socialites huddled near the bar. Then Silvestro was there, gathering her into his arms, his face transformed by fear and fury. Ruby. God, Ruby, stay with me. I'm okay, she managed, though darkness was creeping in at the edges. Is everyone... Everyone's fine because of you. His voice cracked. You stupid, brave, impossible woman. Around them, the battle concluded with efficient violence. Marco was dragged forward, bleeding from a head wound, his expensive suit torn. The gunmen were subdued, disarmed, surrounded. And standing in the doorway, outlined by emergency lighting, stood a figure Ruby had only seen in old photographs. Vincenzo Castellano. very much alive. He was older now, his hair silver, but his eyes were the same cold calculation she remembered from the pictures in Antonio's files. He surveyed the scene with something like amusement, then his gaze settled on Silvestro. "You've grown into quite the leader," Vincenzo said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "Your father would be proud, or perhaps horrified. I can never tell with dead men." "You orchestrated all of this." Silvestro's arm tightened around Ruby protectively. "My father's death, the internal conflicts. Ruby's father, Alessandro Moretti, was a complication that needed removing." Vincenzo's smile never reached his eyes. "Just as you've become a complication. The Sabatini Empire should have been mine. Your father promised me, then gave it to his son instead." He gestured to the ruined ballroom. "But empires built on blood cannot be cleansed with charity galas and noble intentions." "You're wrong." Ruby's voice surprised everyone, including herself. She pushed herself upright despite Silvestro's protests, despite the blood soaking her dress. "My father believed words could change the world. That truth mattered. He died believing it. And look where it got him." Vincenzo's expression remained cold. "It got him remembered." Ruby's vision swam, but she forced the words out. "It got him justice." "And it brought me here, to stop you." Vincenzo laughed, but the sound died when police sirens erupted outside, dozens of them growing closer. His expression finally cracked, revealing something like fear. "You called them," he said to Silvestro, "before the gala began." Silvestro's voice was steel. "I told them everything. Every name in my father's files, every crime, every conspiracy, including yours. You're finished, Vincenzo. The old ways end tonight." As federal agents poured into the ballroom, as Vincenzo and Marco were taken into custody, as the empire Antonio Sabatini had built finally began to crumble under the weight of truth, Ruby felt Silvestro's hand find hers. "You saved me again," he whispered. "We saved each other," Ruby corrected, her strength finally failing as darkness pulled her under. The last thing she heard was Silvestro's voice, desperate and tender, promising her tomorrow. Ruby woke to sunlight streaming through hospital windows and Silvestro asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still wrapped around hers. The bullet had missed anything vital. A miracle, the doctors said, though Ruby suspected it was simply that fate wasn't finished with her story yet. Her shoulder ached beneath clean bandages, but she was alive. They were both alive, and Vincenzo Castellano was in federal custody, along with Marco and a dozen others who'd sold their loyalty to a ghost's promises. Silvestro stirred, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her awake, relief transformed his exhausted features into something beautiful. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey, yourself." Ruby's voice was rough from disuse. "How long?" 3 days. "You lost a lot of blood." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You scared me." "I scared myself." She tried to sit up, wincing. "Your mother?" "Giving statements to federal prosecutors. Apparently she's been documenting everything for years. Insurance against exactly this kind of betrayal." Silvestro's smile was tired but genuine. "She says to tell you that you're grounded from heroics for at least 6 months. Ruby laughed, then immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her shoulder. "What happens now?" "Now?" Silvestro stood, moving to sit carefully on the edge of her bed. "Now we rebuild." The prosecutors offered immunity in exchange for testimony and cooperation. The Sabatini Empire, the criminal side of it, it's over. Finished. Just like that? Nothing's ever just like that. His expression sobered. There will be trials, investigations, media circuses. Some of my father's old associates will fight back. Others will disappear into new identities. But the core of it, the violence, the extortion, the blood money, that ends with me. Ruby searched his face, seeing the weight of that decision, the cost of choosing redemption over legacy. And you're okay with that? I'm terrified, he admitted. I've spent my entire life being my father's son. Now I get to figure out who Silvestro Sabatini actually is without the empire, without the fear. He lifted her hand to his lips. But I think I'd like to find out. With you, if you'll stay. Where else would I go? Ruby's eyes burned with tears that had nothing to do with pain. You're my home now. You and Lucia and this impossible second chance we've both been given. He kissed her then. Gentle, reverent. Full of promises they were both finally free to keep. 6 weeks later, La Valura gleamed under autumn moonlight, its facade freshly painted, its interior transformed. The restaurant had closed for renovations after the gala, officially to repair damage, unofficially to exorcise ghosts. Tonight marked its grand reopening, but everything had changed. Ruby stood in the dining room, no longer wearing a server's uniform but an elegant dress, midnight blue again, because Lucia insisted it brought out her eyes. Around her, the space that had once hosted Manhattan's most dangerous men now welcomed families, artists, non-profit directors. The foundation Silvestro had built occupied the entire second floor, its offices visible through glass walls that promised transparency instead of secrets. Nervous, Marcus appeared at her elbow, looking dapper in his new role as general manager. Terrified, Ruby admitted. What if no one comes? Are you kidding? We're booked solid for 3 months. Marcus grinned. Turns out people love a redemption story. Plus, the food's actually amazing when the chef isn't distracted by which guests might kill each other. Ruby laughed, the sound easier now than it had been in years. Her shoulder still ached sometimes, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. But she wore the scar like a badge, proof that she'd stopped running, stopped hiding, stopped letting fear dictate her story. The door opened, and guests began arriving. Not the dangerous elite of before, but something better. Real people, drawn by curiosity and hope and the promise that even places built on darkness could find light again. Silvestro emerged from the kitchen, stunning in a charcoal suit, his expression softening when he saw her. 6 weeks had changed him, too. The hard edges remained, but something gentler lived beneath now. Permission to feel, to hope, to love without fear of it being weaponized. He crossed to her, ignoring the arriving guests, and took her hands in his. Ready? For what? Everything. His smile held wonder. Our second act. Before Ruby could respond, Lucia arrived, radiant in pearl gray silk, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She moved slowly. The illness that had stolen her hearing was taking other things too, time she couldn't buy back. But her eyes sparkled with joy. Her hands moved in familiar patterns. My beautiful children, look what you've built. Ruby's throat tightened. We built it together, Mama Lucia. The title had come naturally over the past weeks. This woman who'd given her letters and truth and a second family when her first had been stolen. Lucia's eyes glistened as she pulled Ruby into a careful embrace, mindful of healing wounds. Your father would be so proud, Lucia signed. Alessandro wanted words to change the world. You proved they could. The evening unfolded like a dream. Guests filled tables, laughter replaced whispered threats, and the music was jazz instead of tension. Ruby found herself moving through the dining room not as a server, but as a host, welcoming strangers, sharing stories, watching Silvestro work the room with charm he'd never had permission to use before. At one point, she caught him watching her from across the restaurant, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. Not possession or protection, but partnership. Equals who'd saved each other from drowning. Near midnight, when most guests had departed, Ruby brought tea to the corner table, Table 9, where this had all begun. Silvestro sat with his mother, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. Ruby set down the service with ceremony, then joined them, sliding into the chair that had once held such terror. Now it simply felt like home. Lucia's hands moved, slow and deliberate. "Do you know what I see when I look at you both?" "What?" Silvestro asked, his voice gentle. "Hope." Lucia's smile trembled. "My husband built an empire on fear. You're building something on love, love of justice, of redemption, of each other. That's the legacy that will outlast us all." She reached out, taking one hand from each of them, joining them together. Her next sign came with tears streaming down her elegant cheeks. Family. Ruby's vision blurred as she signed back, her free hand moving with absolute certainty. Forever. The restaurant fell silent then, not the shocked silence of that first night when a quiet waitress had spoken a Mafia boss's mother's language, but something deeper. The reverent quiet of witnessing magic, of seeing broken things mended, of understanding that some silences held more truth than words ever could. Silvestro's hand tightened around Ruby's, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper but carried the weight of everything they'd survived. "You brought silence to my chaos, and somehow made it feel like peace." Ruby looked at him. This man who'd been born into violence but chose tenderness, who'd inherited an empire but built a foundation instead, who'd learned that true strength wasn't domination, but the courage to be vulnerable. "You gave me a reason to stop running," she whispered back. "A place to finally stand still." Outside, Manhattan glittered with its usual indifference, a city that had witnessed countless stories of rise and fall, love and loss, darkness and redemption. Inside La Velura, 3 people sat in comfortable silence, bound by tragedy and choice, and the miraculous understanding that sometimes the quietest moments spoke the loudest truths. Lucia signed one final message before exhaustion claimed her. "This is what your father died for, Ruby. Not justice for crimes, but the hope that love could break cycles of violence. You and Silvestro. You're the proof he was right." As Silvestro helped his mother to the car, as Ruby turned off the lights one by one, as the restaurant settled into the peaceful quiet of endings that were really beginnings, she thought about all the silences she'd known, the silence of fear, the silence of hiding, the silence of grief, and now, finally, the silence of peace. Ruby locked the door behind her, where Silvestro waited beneath the lamplight, his hand extended. She took it, their fingers interlacing with the ease of practice, and together they walked into the autumn night. Behind them, La Velura stood transformed, no longer a stage for dangerous games, but a testament to the truth that no legacy was permanent, no pattern unbreakable, no person beyond redemption. The restaurant had fallen silent when a quiet waitress spoke a Mafia boss's mother's language. But it was the language they'd created together, of trust and courage and love that refused to be silenced. That had changed everything. And that, Ruby thought as Silvestro pulled her close, was the purest magic of all. What did you think of Silvestro's and Ruby's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this one? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.